It's the late 90s. You're attending a local film festival not far from home when you are handed something. It's a missing persons poster, showing the images of 3 student filmmakers. In 1994, these students set out to record a documentary in the Black Hills Forest in Burkittsville, Maryland, and due to unknown circumstances, they were never seen again. A year later, anthropology professor David Mercer discovers a duffel bag buried under an old cabin containing the students' recording equipment. And then, a website. As it turns out, the students had documented their entire hike through the woods from the beginning all the way up to when they disappeared, and that footage had been compiled to create a movie. The most profitable movie in all of filmmaking history. Their names are Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams. And this is the Blair Witch Project.
Local officials, combined with over 100 search volunteers, have failed to come up with any sign of the 3 missing filmmakers.
The search of the 3 missing Montgomery College students continues in Frederick County tonight, as dozens of volunteers and state officials join local forces in what has now become a full-scale search of the Black Hills area.
The 3 student filmmakers are still missing.
BlairWitch.com was a website published in 1999, created by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sánchez. The two planned to use the site to promote their upcoming film, The Blair Witch Project. The website was split up into 4 main parts, including a section on the mythology surrounding the Blair Witch, information on the filmmakers that went missing, a detailed account of the aftermath of the situation, and evidence of the legacy left behind. Something we're absolutely certain of 25 years later that was not clear to the website's viewers at the time is that all the information on the website and the film it was promoting was entirely fictional. The mythology was completely made up, the legend of the Blair Witch was not true, and the missing persons seen in the film are actors. In reality, Daniel and Eduardo were 2 very talented directors with a great idea: create a 78-minute horror film, find 3 actors through a casting call they advertised through Backstage magazine, and using insane marketing tactics and promotional stunts, fool the world into believing it's real. Prior to the release of the film, its creators would encourage the production of bootleg copies of the film to be shared online, and would hand out missing persons posters at film festivals. This allowed the team to build up an online following for the documentary before it had even been released, and fans could opt in to receive emails from the official newsletter updating them on the production of the film. And before its release, another film titled Curse of the Blair Witch aired on the Sci-Fi Channel on July 11th, 1999. This mockumentary served as promotion for the Blair Witch Project, using footage from the film as teasers, interviewing the family of the missing students, and announcing its official release date along with more promotion for BlairWitch.com. On release, the website raked in millions of views from fans all over the internet, making it the first and most successful online movie marketing stunt in history. Before we dive deep into the film itself, let's first learn more about the 3 missing students through their official biographies posted on BlairWitch.com. Heather Donahue was born in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, but soon relocated to Baltimore, on the outskirts of which her great-grandmother lived. Some of Heather's earliest memories are of her great-grandma's tales of Civil War ghosts and witches said to haunt the area. While Heather relished the terror those stories inspired in her early on, she later came to appreciate the historical and sociological value that this oral tradition provided. She made it her mission to investigate and document the origins of these stories, primarily as an act of preservation. Moving out on her own to Wheaton, Maryland in 1991, this led her to Montgomery College in Rockville, where she studied video production. After saving money she earned as the videographer of countless weddings and bar mitzvahs, she began planning her first major project, a documentary on the story of her great-grandmothers that both fascinated and frightened her the most, the story that resurfaced so often in both history and her own mind, the legend of the Blair Witch. Joshua Leonard began his filmmaking career at 9 years old, documenting local sporting events and family gatherings on his father's 8mm Bell & Howell. Later, in his high school years, he wrote and directed his own TV show MD Skunk, which quickly became a local favorite of the Rockville youth culture. Joshua later attended and graduated from the television program at Montgomery Community College. At MCC, he learned an array of filmmaking techniques, including online beta editing, basic sound design, 3-point lighting, and 16mm film production. Joshua's latest project is The Blair Witch Project, a feature-length documentary directed by Heather Donahue. The film explores the folklore and local legends of the occult in Burkittsville and surrounding areas. Michael Williams was born on January 23, 1973 to Louis and Lorraine Williams in a hospital in Washington, D.C. At the age of 5, Mike won first prize in kindergarten for the best drawing of a fish. Since then, he has won absolutely nothing except for least likely to succeed in his graduating year of high school. Later in life, he would enroll part-time at Montgomery College. Mike took an interest in communications, particularly in radio, where he hosted a show called The Whiskey Hour with his friend Phil on the campus radio station. He was now 22 and was happier with his life than probably any other time due to the success of his radio show. He had also taken 2 courses in sound mixing and editing for film, which is where he met Joshua Leonard. Mike hadn't heard from Josh at all in the summer of 1994 until late August, when Josh called and asked him if he would like to join himself and Heather Donahue in shooting Heather's senior thesis project about the local legend of the Blair Witch. He accepted the job because he knew he could learn a lot from Josh and the experience. In July, Mike got another part-time job mixing sound for a company that did industrials called Westlake Productions. Josh was thrilled to learn that Mike could score a free DAT for the weekend, and apparently so was Heather. So begins Mike's role in the Blair Witch Project. The 3 actors cast for the film all use their real names. Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams are all real people. This did cause some problems for the cast later down the line, but I'll get to that later. Let's not waste any more time. The film opens with white text on a black background. In October of 1994, 3 student filmmakers disappeared in the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland while shooting a documentary. A year later, their footage was found. We then see the inside of Heather Donahue's home as she prepares for the first day of shooting her documentary, first showing off a collection of books she owns, including How to Stay Alive in the Woods, a real guide published in 1956, a personal notebook, and a book containing information about Coffin Rock, an old rock formation in the Black Hills Forest relating to the Blair Witch, its story I'll come back to later. We then see Josh exiting his car and showing Heather the camera he has acquired to shoot the film, a CP16, 16 meaning 16mm. Everything shot on the CP16 is intended to be used for the documentary and appears in black and white, typically the storytelling clips, while all of the found footage is shown in color. This is footage that was discovered after the filmmakers went missing but was not necessarily intended to be used, all of which was recorded on a Hi8 camcorder. The 2 then meet up with Mike and go shopping for food and other supplies as they intend to be recording in the woods for the entire weekend. And arriving in Burkittsville, using the CP16 camera, they shoot their first scene, an introduction to the film in which Heather says the following. This is Burkittsville, formerly Blair. It is a small, quiet Maryland town, much like a small, quiet town anywhere. No more than 20 families laid their roots here over 200 years ago, many of whom remain either on this hill or in the town below. There are an unusually high number of children laid to rest here, most of whom passed in the 1940s. Yet no one in this town seems to recall anything unusual about this time. To us anyway. Yet legend tells a different story, one whose evidence is all around us, etched in stone. The three then celebrate the recording of the first scene, and driving further into Burkittsville, they begin to interview locals about the Blair Witch, hoping to gather some more information. And in doing so, they are told some very disturbing stories, the first of which is told by a man by the name of Jim Maynard. As I remember, Mr. Parr was an old hermit. He lived up on a mountain. He had a place up there, been there for a long, long time. In the fall or the winter of 1940, some of the young kids started to disappear. Nobody knew anything about why they were disappearing. Finally, one day, old Mr. Parr came down into the market and said, "I'm finally finished." I guess nobody knew at first, but the police went up on the mountain and searched his house, and they found the bodies of 7 kids from the area. The man that Jim refers to in this story is Rustin Parr, and you can find his entire story on the Blair Witch website. Rustin Parr was 38 years old in 1941. He had lived in Frederick County, Maryland all his life. He didn't go to school much. Both his parents were dead before he was 10 years old. That's when Rustin moved to Burkittsville to live with his aunt and uncle. His uncle was pretty abusive, but he was a carpenter, and he taught Rustin everything he knew. He liked Burkittsville a lot. The woods that surrounded the town were great to get away from everyone and be by himself. He always liked to be by himself. That's why it wasn't much of a surprise when Rustin decided to build a house up in the hillside, a 4-hour walk from town. He was in his early 20s, and it took him almost 5 years to finish the house. It was a beautiful 3-story home next to a creek. Rustin continued to work at his uncle's shop for a few more years, but little by little he began to come into town less and less. Then his aunt died, and his uncle moved to Baltimore. There wasn't much of a reason to go back anymore. He lived in that house ever since. He lived a peaceful life, smoking his pipe and taking long walks in the woods. Rustin was happy. He loved nature and the animals all around him. He only went into town about twice a year to pick up supplies. Rustin can't remember exactly when, but it seemed to be a few years before the killings that he started seeing a figure in the woods sometimes during his long walks. He would call out to it, but it would disappear. He soon realized that it was a woman, though she never showed her face to him. She wore a long, dark hooded cloak. Rustin never felt fear when he saw the woman, he just wondered who she was. Every time he would run after her, she would vanish. Then, that winter, Rustin began to hear a voice in his head. At first it was at night, and then he thought they were dreams. But soon he started hearing the voice during his walking hours, and that's when he began to be afraid. The voice was an old woman. She would say all kind of things to him in many strange languages. Sometimes she would repeat words over and over again. Rustin never saw the woman in the woods ever again, but the voice lived in his head for quite a while. After almost a year of this voice, Rustin had lost most of his senses. The voice began to tell him to do things, and he found himself doing them. At first they were meaningless things like sleeping in the cellar for a week at a time. Then, in November of 1940, she told him to go down into Burkittsville and get the first 2 children he saw. For some reason, he found himself unable to resist. Actually unwilling to resist. He followed the voice's directions completely, even when it began instructing him to take more children from the town of Burkittsville and kill them. In all, Rustin murdered 7 children and spared 1. Kyle Brody, a boy who was made to stand in the corner while Rustin performed the awful act in the cellar of his house. After the 7th child was killed, Rustin woke up and the cloaked figure was in his room. He couldn't see it clearly in the dark, but he knew who it was. She spoke to him in the same horrible voice that had haunted his head for more than a year now. She told him that he was finished and that he was to go into town the next day and tell everyone what he had done. She said she would leave him alone if he did this. Then, the figure disappeared, and Rustin Parr never saw the woman again. The next day, Rustin woke up and released Kyle. He cried for the first time ever when he saw the poor boy that morning. Rustin then walked slowly into town, went into the market, and began saying, "I'm finally finished." The police followed him up to his house and found Kyle standing on the front porch looking dazed and unable to speak. They then found the bodies of the 7 little children in 7 graves in the cellar of his house. Rustin was arrested and convicted of the deaths. The voice did stop in Rustin's head. He didn't know who the cloaked woman was, but he knew that she was an old ghost of some kind. He was positive that this woman was not alive. He was truly sorry for what he did, but at the same time was incredibly glad that this woman was out of his head. Kyle Brody never recovered from the 2 months in Parr's house. He would live an institutionalized life until his death in 1971. He was present the day of Parr's verdict in court and cried when the jury convicted the hermit. Rustin Parr died in the fall of 1941. He was hanged. The website holds a lot more information that I'll be referring to throughout this video. It's also during these street interviews that the group are told of a person by the name of Mary Brown, an old woman who supposedly had an encounter with the Blair Witch many years ago, though she is described by the people of the town as crazy. The 3 then go to Mary's house to interview her about her encounter. To make ends meet, my dad and I would go fishing down by Tappy's Creek. I was lying down on a pile of leaves, washing my pole and looking up at the sky, and all of a sudden, I felt like something was near me, kind of an eerie feeling. It was a woman. Only on her arms and on her hands and everything was hair, real dark, almost black hair, like horse fur. She had a wool shawl over her, and she didn't say anything, but she just kept staring. And then she opened up her shawl, and under there was hair on her body, like a horse. It was kind of strange looking. The 3 aren't entirely convinced that Mary's story is true given her reputation. However, they're happy with what they've recorded and settled down for the night in a motel to prepare for what's to come. They plan to hike through the Black Hills forest for a full day to shoot more scenes for the film, the same woods that saw the disappearance and murders of several children in the 19th and early 20th century, including the 7 children discussed earlier. But the main landmark Heather is interested in finding within the forest is Coffin Rock. And waking up on day 2, they drive to the forest to begin their hike, immediately stumbling upon 2 fishermen with more stories to tell. Some girl back in the late 1800s, Robin Weaver, I believe her name was, supposedly just wandered off, disappeared into the woods. 3 days later, she just appears, back on her grandmother's porch. And everybody's mystified about it, and she was babbling something about an old woman whose feet never touched the ground. Anybody worth their salt around here knows this area's been haunted by that old woman for years. One of the fishermen says that this story ties into what happened at Coffin Rock, which is supposedly less than 20 minutes away from town and easily accessible by an old logging trail. And with this information, they set out to find it, driving towards the trail and parking Josh's car on Black Rock Road, where they put on their backpacks and begin walking. Within only a few minutes, using a map of the area that Heather had brought with her, they find themselves at Coffin Rock, where they begin recording the next scene.
They went into the woods prepared to find death. What they found was a desecration of humanity at the site which trappers have often referred to as Coffin Rock. On top of the rock formation, the story of the torture inflicted upon these brave 5 men unfolded. Each was bound to the other, each man's hands bound to the next man's feet, forming a solid structure out of the men. Blood at the edges of the hemp indicate that this act had been committed while each was alive and able-bodied enough to struggle. In the torso of each man, the intestines had been torn out crudely. On each man's sun-bleached face was inscribed indecipherable writing, cut into their flesh with an eerie precision. The men, still entranced by the horror of what had happened, left the scene to find the sheriff, and did not sketch the writing and did not remove the bodies from the rock. Upon return, vultures were seen at the rock, but upon inspection, the bodies had been removed by persons unknown. The search party claims that the stench of death was still thick, and whomever had taken the bodies had done so in a matter of hours. That happened here, at Coffin Rock.
The story told here is closely linked to Robin Weaver, the missing girl that the two fishermen spoke of. Here, a short paragraph about Coffin Rock explains that the 5 men found dead at the site were searching for Robin Weaver before being tied together and disemboweled, and their bodies were mysteriously removed from the rock before the police had the chance to investigate. This all happened in March of 1886, while the Rustin Parr story occurred over 50 years later between 1940 and 1941. The earliest major event in the history of the Blair Witch occurred all the way back in the late 1700s with the story of Ellie Kedward, a woman who was accused multiple times of luring children back to her house to draw blood from them, causing her to be found guilty of witchcraft and banished from the village. A year later, all of Ellie's accusers and half of the town's children vanished without a trace, which is why there are an unusual amount of children resting in Blair's graveyards as mentioned by Heather earlier in the film. The 3 then continue walking through the forest, planning to set up camp before the sun sets so they can sleep and continue the following day. And cutting to morning, Josh mentions hearing a few noises whilst trying to sleep. He says one sound appeared to be an owl, whilst the other was a strange cackling noise, but it wasn't enough to stop him from sleeping. The 3 then discuss the map they're using to keep track of where they are, as Heather got them lost for a brief amount of time the day prior, with Mike and Josh asking her to pay more attention so they don't get lost again. However, the opposite approach is taken as they immediately begin taking shortcuts, leading to an argument between them, with Mike being adamant that they're lost, whilst Heather isn't willing to admit it.
Although I gotta tell you, I don't fully trust you. And
What?
Nothing. I don't know why you have to have every conversation on video, man. Tape some evidence.
Because we're making a documentary.
Not about us getting lost. We're making a documentary about a witch.
The more walking the 3 do, the less excited and passionate they become as they start getting tired and hungry. But their enthusiasm comes back once they discover something unusual. Piles of rocks all within a small section of the woods, one after the other. This concerns Heather, remembering that Mary Brown had mentioned something about a pile of rocks 2 days before. Do you remember something that Mary Brown said the other day? What was the story from the Bible she was telling us? It was something about a pile of rocks. The conversation that included this story was never recorded. However, a quick Google search points us directly to Genesis 31:52. This pile of rocks and this one special rock both help us to remember our agreement. I will never go past these rocks to fight against you, and you must never go on my side of these rocks to fight against me. In Genesis 31, there is a confrontation between Jacob and Laban. Laban falsely accuses Jacob of stealing some of his possessions, and Jacob becomes frustrated at Laban for assuming that he was the thief. He grants Laban permission to search his entire house, to which the items are not recovered as they were actually stolen by Rachel. The 2 then agree to make a covenant of peace between them and create piles of rocks as a witness to their pact. As these rocks were used to symbolize the pact between the 2, it was clear that they were not to be touched or tampered with, as destroying these piles would also mean destroying their agreement. The group are mesmerized by the stones, and in the late hours of the night begin recording around the area, getting more shots of the rocks and capturing nearby ambience. And in doing so, Josh accidentally knocks over one of the piles.
You didn't just knock that over. Please tell me you didn't just knock that over. That's not very nice.
Heather tries to pile the rocks back up again. However, the damage was already done.
Hello? Shit, the light. We were sleeping. Just keep it by the opening in the tent. Hello? Hello? It's all around us. That is fucking weird. Michael, are you saying you're not coming down?
I ain't going down there.
Why not?
Because I'm not. I don't hear shit.
Because you're fucking scared.
Because I don't hear anything anymore.
Because you're fucking scared. We heard. You could not deny hearing it. Get your ass out. What's the big deal?
Despite the loud noises heard that night, the group eventually managed to fall asleep, and waking up the next morning, their only concern is to get out of the forest. At this point, nobody is able to agree on if they're heading the right way, even whilst using the map. So they devise a new plan. Follow the creek until they reach the end of the woods. Josh and Heather are set on the plan, however Mike becomes frustrated, and the day passes quickly, to which they camp once again. Throughout the night, the same noises occur, only this time louder, and despite being creepy, these sounds are technically harmless, and they find themselves drifting to sleep, only to find 3 piles of rocks outside their tent when they wake up. Josh begs Heather to stop filming and focus on finding a way back to the car, though she persistently refuses. However, the worst discovery of that morning was yet to come. The map was missing. Unable to agree on who was responsible for the map's disappearance, the trust among the group starts to weaken, and as time ticks on, the 3 become disoriented as Josh rolls around in the leaves. Yet they're still alert enough to know they have to carry on. It's October 24th, Monday. They've been lost in the woods now for 3 days. Josh is supposed to be at work, and they no longer have enough time to give the equipment back that they borrowed to shoot the film. Yet this does give them a little bit of hope, knowing that someone out there is soon going to notice that they're missing. This tiny bit of hope is the last thing they have that's stopping them from completely losing their minds. A few moments later, Josh and Mike begin laughing for the first time in days as Heather's shoes had become wet whilst attempting to cross a stream, and a small argument breaks out once again, involving a discussion and disagreement on the whereabouts of the map, to which Mike reveals some unforgiving news.
Fine.
We're fucking hungry, we're fucking tired, what the hell else are we supposed to do
what?
at this point?
I kicked the. I'm sorry, it's fucked up. It's fucked up, but I kicked that fucking map into the creek yesterday. It was useless. I kicked that fucker into the creek.
I fucking hope this kid.
Wow!
Mike?
Holy shit!
You've got to be kidding me.
Mike?
You have got to fucking be kidding me.
Fucking get the fuck off me, man!
What the fuck are you out of your fucking mind?
Oh, I'm not out of my mind.
Right,
The map doesn't do a shit.
You realize not to you, but I do what the fuck that map
I'm
says.
sorry.
You are a fucking asshole.
I'm sorry.
You're a fucking asshole. And
The map wasn't doing shit all day.
if we get hurt or if we die out here, it's your fucking fault. It is your fucking fault.
At this point, the trust among the group was beyond broken. Despite the map not being the greatest help in guiding the 3 through the forest, it was better than nothing, and losing it was beyond irresponsible. All they had now was a compass, but for obvious reasons, no one was trusted to use it and be responsible for it. No one knew what to think anymore, and hope was fading once again. Then they find something. A large amount of sticks, all tied together and conjoined to create symbols that had been plastered all over this small area of the woods. A 5-point symbol reminiscent of the human figure. These creations are called Twanas, and they represent the Blair Witch. Being commonly compared to the Vitruvian Man drawing by Leonardo da Vinci, the Twanas are seen as a magical charm and symbol of witchcraft. The group, however, are unaware of this. Even with Heather's extensive knowledge on the subject, they fail to recognize the logo, but are still fascinated by it as they capture it all on film. But being creeped out by the area, they decide not to stay for too long. You may be wondering how the actors were able to discover these strange strange locations as they were actually left to roam around in the woods on their own. After being cast in the film, the actors were given a 35-page screenplay that outlined the plot, key scenes, and character descriptions, but there was no written dialogue. This means that the majority of the film was entirely improvised, and the directors had left them completely alone in the woods, which meant they needed some way to communicate with them whilst they were filming. They did this via GPS, giving the actors devices that would lead them to locations that had been marked with milk bottles or flags. Here they would pick up directing notes left by the creators that would vaguely instruct them on what to do during each day and how to act. But the GPS wouldn't just lead them to these notes, they'd also lead them to these key locations, including this area. The directors put their full trust in the three to improvise well and react accordingly to certain scenarios, and it was these techniques that got them the result they wanted. Nighttime rolls around again, and the tent has been set up. However, they decide not to light a fire this time, believing that doing so will only attract more attention towards them, and instead, they turn off the lights and go straight to bed.
Jesus Christ, look, it's... Oh, Jesus Christ.
Let me get my jeans on.
Oh, Jesus.
Take the video camera. No, get the dot ready.
Oh, Jesus! Go, fucking go! Hurry up!
I'm coming! My boots aren't laced.
Oh my God, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? Turn the lights off. Turn that light off. Turn it off, Josh. All lights off. All lights off. All lights off.
They then wait for the sun to rise, and having not heard anything for the past hour, the three decide it's safe to head back to the tent and collect their things, only to find that Mike's backpack is missing and that Josh's items had been covered in what he describes as blue slime. Josh and Mike are no longer interested in filming, encouraging Heather to focus on what's more important, but like always, she keeps the camera on, and it's on this day, October 25th, that the group really start losing it. Josh is itching for a cigarette, and Mike seems to have lost all emotion. Despite being desperate to exit the woods, it seems almost like they don't care anymore, and the days had now become a repeating process. Wake up, walk, argue, sleep. Wake up, walk, argue, sleep. Wake up, walk, argue, sleep. The three had not prepared themselves to walk for as many days as they have, the passing time endlessly spinning a windmill of emotions. Ever since they'd lost the map, they had been using Heather's compass to find their way, agreeing to walk south continuously. But as they were about to find out, that was the wrong idea, as they discover a log connecting both sides of the creek. The same log that they crossed 3 days before. Fueled with anger, Josh absolutely loses it with Heather. You're lost, you're angry in the woods, and no one's here to help you. There's a witch and she keeps leaving stuff outside your door. There's no one here to help you. She left little trinkets. You took one of them and she ran after us. There's no one here to help you. We walked for 15 hours today. We ended up in the same place. There's no one here to help you. That's your motivation. Josh is rightfully upset that Heather's priorities are still set on the documentary, but Heather is clearly using the camera as a coping mechanism, saying that it's all she has left, yet Josh shows zero sympathy. Are you going to write us a happy ending, Heather? I highly recommend watching the original film for yourself, as it's gut-wrenching scenes like this that really make it. As the fifth night comes around, the three begin to reminisce in the tent about life before they got lost, and to their surprise, nothing happens throughout the night that keeps them from falling asleep. However, they would wake to a horrible discovery. Josh was gone. Mike and Heather immediately searched the area around them, but Josh was nowhere to be found. All of his belongings, however, were still by the tent, meaning that if he really did go missing in the middle of the night, all he has with him are the clothes on his back and zero supplies for survival. The two spend the whole day searching and figuring out what to do next, eventually deciding to begin walking east instead of south, and as they set up the tent for another night, it was clear that they would probably never see Josh ever again. A male voice is heard screaming in the distance. Being completely isolated, Mike and Heather are convinced it's the voice of Josh. But understanding the supernatural history of the area and knowing what had happened during previous nights, the two don't want to get too close to it as it may be a trick. With Mike saying, if that was really Josh, he would have said where he was. And with enough effort, they eventually managed to get some rest. Waking up in the morning, Heather leaves the tent whilst Mike is still sleeping, only to find a pile of sticks outside the tent, tied together using the fabric from Josh's shirt. She wakes Mike up and moves the pile, throwing it in the distance and hoping to forget about it. The two are visibly distraught as they begin rocking back and forth, crying. It's their 7th day in the forest and supplies are running low. Even if they want to walk more today, they simply don't have the energy for it, having eaten nothing for days. And with nothing else to do, curiosity gets the best of Heather, and she opens the bundle of sticks, and within it she finds lots and lots of blood. It's not entirely clear as to what is held inside the pile, however, it apparently contains a tongue, a finger, some teeth, and hair. The implication of this finding is very clear, and despite not telling Mike what she found, Heather appears completely broken by it, and the two fall silent, barely saying a word to each other for the remainder of the day as they wander around aimlessly with absolutely no goal in mind, almost as if they were admitting defeat. Then, in the middle of the night, Heather picks up the camera.
I just want to apologize to Mike's mom and Josh's mom and my mom. I am so sorry for everything that has happened. Because in spite of what Mike says now, it is my fault. Because it was my project. And I insisted. Everything had to be my way. And this is where we've ended up. And it's all because of me that we're here now. Hungry and cold and hunted. I'm so sorry. I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
The screaming returns. They know who's making the sounds, and they cannot bear listening to it throughout the night, knowing they're doing nothing to help. And as a last resort, Mike and Heather leave the tent. With cameras in hand, they wade further through the woods, prepared to find death.
Come on. Come on, in the house. Oh, Jesus. We go upstairs. I hear him. I hear him. I hear you. Josh! I'm going upstairs. Come on, Josh. I hear him downstairs. Come on, I hear him downstairs. Come on, Josh. Josh.
When I recommend this film to people, they are often underwhelmed by the ending. Is that it? Or it wasn't even scary are the main comments I receive, and believe me, I was also a little confused when I first watched it, but what you have to realise is that the film never intended to be scary, it intended to be realistic. If instead it had ended with a loud, over-the-top jump scare, it not only would have felt cheap, it would have also felt fake, ruining the illusion that had been expertly crafted for the first 95% of its runtime. The creators did experiment with alternate endings to the film, some of which were far more gruesome than others. However, they settled on this ending for a very specific reason. Everything that happens within the film perfectly ties into the mythology created by its directors, which the actors had no idea was completely fictional until after they were finished filming. Every small detail was perfect, and you may have not even realized it. In the ending of the film, we see Mike and Heather entering a two-story house after hearing the voice of Josh echo through the woods. If you remember one of the stories I read earlier in this video taken from the official Blair Witch mythology, then you may remember a man by the name of Rustin Parr, who in the 1940s murdered 7 children from the Burkittsville area, claiming he was told to do so by the voice that lived inside his head. In his early 20s, he had built his own house in the forest, the same house that he killed those kids in, and the same house that Mike and Heather found 50 years later. On the Blair Witch website, there are several videos of Rustin Parr from the 1940s, taken around the time of his conviction. These videos include reporters asking him questions before his execution. Rustin answered most questions with a simple yes or no. However, there was one question that stuck out from the rest. Mr. Parr, was it the Blair Witch? In the website version of this video, Rustin Parr doesn't give a response to this question, with the interview ending shortly after it is asked. However, in Curse of the Blair Witch, the same interview is shown, to which we hear Mr. Parr saying it could have been, in response to the same question. This clip confirms that Rustin Parr is aware of the Blair Witch story, having lived in Burkittsville his entire life. He has also previously described the voice in his head as an old old woman ghost, a very similar description to Mary Brown's sighting of the Blair Witch. And that wasn't the only similarity. In the early interviews at the beginning of the film, it is described how the Blair Witch would kill her victims. According to the townspeople, the Blair Witch wouldn't always kill people directly. Instead, she would bewitch the minds of others, forcing them to do the work for her. And in Rustin Parr's case, she would force him to take the kids into the basement in pairs, make one child face into the corner, while he killed the other one. And it wouldn't be the last time this happened. When Heather and Mike went down into the basement of Rustin Parr's old house, they were not killed by the Blair Witch. They were killed by Josh. This, of course, isn't a confirmed theory. However, it makes the most sense to me given how the Blair Witch has caused the death of people in the past. The night that Josh went missing, he was taken by the Blair Witch, who instructed him to lure the others to the house and kill them one by one. There are plenty of other theories out there that have been circulating ever since the release of the film. The most popular one being that there was no Blair Witch at all, and that Mike and Josh killed Heather on their own. A theory that I entirely disagree with, as Heather was the one interested in the story to begin with, planning the entire film and trip into the woods herself. You can check out some of these theories for yourself if you wish, however, I'll be sticking by what I've said. Heather and Mike were murdered by the Blair Witch, either directly or through the manipulation of Josh. It's also highly assumed and believed that the Blair Witch is Ellie Kedward, the woman from Blair who was banished from the village in the 1700s after being accused of witchcraft. There are more videos on BlairWitch.com that show the police investigating the tapes left behind, also confirming to us that the search team was dispatched to find the group on October 26, 1994, 2 days before they died. There are also plenty of interviews with police detectives, private investigators, and the family of the three available online. The official website no longer exists, however I will leave a link to an archive of it in the description so you can check it out for yourself. After raking in $248.6 million from an original $60,000 budget, the Blair Witch Project had marked itself as the most profitable film in history. And with that came one question. How do you top that? How do you follow up something so unique that replicating its success will be nearly impossible? The short answer is, you don't. The creation of the Blair Witch Project was incredibly smart, but it was also unbelievably lucky. Despite having a very original idea for both the film and its marketing, the creators didn't know it was going to work, so the chances of this happening again is insanely slim. Nevertheless, they tried anyway. Several sequels and spin-offs were created, most notably 2016's Blair Witch, but I'm not going to talk about those in this video. Usually when people hear the word sequel, they expect a badly put together mess of a film that ruins the original story with poor research and a lazy plot. This means that reviewers will delve into the sequels with biased opinions as they are expecting to dislike them rather than separating it from the original and giving it a proper insight. If you want to know what the sequels are like, go and watch them for yourself and form your own opinion, but please watch the original first. I also won't be giving my opinions on the sequels because I haven't seen them. In 2024, Lionsgate, who are now the owners of the Blair Witch franchise, announced a reboot of the film, causing the original cast to begin calling out the company and the original film distributors for some very sketchy things. This includes not paying the actors what they are owed in relation to the film's success, and even claiming copyright over the actors' real names. In 2020, Heather Donahue legally changed her name to Ray Hance to separate herself from the Blair Witch Project, saying that using her real name in the film is her biggest regret to this day. Joshua Leonard posted a statement on his Instagram page in regards to the issues the cast has had with Lionsgate. You can pause the video if you wish to read it here, or you can check out the original post for yourself, which I'll leave in the description. Overall, the film grossed $248.6 million worldwide after its release, over 4,000 times its original budget of $60,000, making it one of the most profitable films in history. This has been the story of the Blair Witch Project. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all later.